Nichelle Nichols, may you rest in peace. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is another declaration of truth from your host, Terry A. Hurlbut. 2 nights ago, actress Nichelle Nichols, known to Star Trek fans as Lieutenant Uhura, died quietly at home. She was 89 years old. Naturally, Star Trek fans are mourning her passing, as anyone should expect. But in fact, she was a true pioneer in American television. What Sidney Poitier did for movies, Nichelle Nichols did for television. And she made it look like the most natural thing in the world, or a galaxy. Before I get into any more detail, I do want to shout out to the sponsor of this channel, which is Conservative News and Views, link in the description. Be sure to check out the awesome CNAV Store. Scroll down near the bottom for that link. Lots of good merchandise there, including this t-shirt that I have chosen today. Now you'll notice across the top it reads Mickey, as in mouse, in Walt Disney's actual print script, not his cursive signature, which is distinctive in its own right. But if you look closely, it's casting a reflection, and the reflection reads Wicked. This is what can happen to a good franchise in the wrong hands. But I am not here to talk about what has happened to Disney or what has happened to Star Trek. I'm going to talk about how Star Trek started out as the greatest achievement in good race relations in the history of television. No less an authority than Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that. I'll have much more to say about that later. Nichelle Nichols' obituaries appear in NPR, The Washington Post, USA Today, The New York Times, and the PBS NewsHour. These obits mainly contain the bare facts of her career and how she died. The details on that are sketchy. No doubt the death certificate has the giant economy size cause, natural causes. Now, we have no indication that she suffered in any way. The White House issued a brief statement, to which I've left a link in the description, that only hints at her achievements. Its first paragraph sums it up nicely. Quote, "In Nichelle Nichols, our nation has lost a trailblazer of stage and screen who redefined what is possible for Black Americans and women." All perfectly true, but that doesn't tell the half of what she achieved. And what she meant to so many. Fans of the show, of course, through 3 seasons and 6 feature films. But let's not forget the rest of the cast who still survive, and her family. And in cast, let's include the actress Kate Mulgrew, who played Captain Catherine Janeway of USS Voyager, NCC 74656. She left this message on her blue checkmark account on Twitter, and again, I will leave a link in the description. Quote, "Nichelle Nichols was the first. She was a trailblazer who navigated a very challenging trail with grit, grace, and a gorgeous fire we are not likely to see again." Unquote, Kate Mulgrew. NASA graciously acknowledged her role as a recruiter. I've left a link in the description to that too. You know, got to hand it to those guys. They gave Nichelle a Pookie suit to wear with her name on it and had her sit at the Capcom console. How appropriate! Capcom, the capsule communicator, the only officer in any mission control team having any authority to talk directly to a team of astronauts aloft. Now, but NASA did not mention that Nichelle was on hand for the rollout of NASA's glide test shuttle model, which they named Enterprise, in honor of the fictional ship on which her character served. Happily, I have better sources than these. By far the best sources I have, other than reruns of the original series, are 2 books, almost contemporary with the series. They are The Trouble with Tribbles and The World of Star Trek by writer David Gerrold. Mr. Gerrold published these in the 1970s, before the first feature film came out. So those sources are as close to contemporary as anything other than a script. Few were better qualified to write about Star Trek from from a near outsider's perspective than David Gerrold. Star Trek gave him his start in television, and then is now developing the connections to break into professional writing is extremely difficult, but he did it. And he gained the confidence of cast and crew alike. For the world of Star Trek, he interviewed 7 of the 8 regular cast members. Majel Barrett, who married creator Gene Roddenberry, deferred to him. Nichelle Nichols gave one of those interviews, and no other source has a better perspective from the beginning. From the beginning, Nichelle Nichols asserted herself, and that would pay off dividends. To get the part, she had to read some lines. The problem was that her character was so new they didn't have a name. So Joe DaCosta, the casting director, asked her to read some of Spock's lines. But instead of telling her about Spock, he wanted to talk about this new character that didn't even have a name. She insisted that they tell her about Spock so that she could deliver Spock's lines. They did, she did, and it worked. Now that interview reveals 2 other interesting things about her career. First, the harassment of women on set was a problem even then and even on Star Trek. In fact, Gene Roddenberry had a nasty reputation for that kind of thing, but that would become apparent only years after he died. Yet Nichelle Nichols doesn't seem to have had much of a problem with it. Why not? Perhaps because in at least 2 encounters, she let the men know that she would never tolerate it. The first episode involves cinematographer Jerry Finneman. He met her on the set for the first time, and then, apropos of nothing, he reached out, took her face lightly in his hands, and said, "I'm going to do great things with you." She abruptly rebuked him and fled. Then someone told her who he was, and she must have feared that she had just lost her job. Wrong! Mr. Finneman came to her dressing room and apologized for the misunderstanding. Then he explained that by great things he meant that her face would lend itself beautifully to creative lighting, which is what cinematography is all about. The second episode involved Gene Roddenberry himself. As she told David Gerrold, Nichelle Nichols saw a strange man hanging around the set and paying her very close attention. After several such near misses, she turned to him and said, "Now look, you," and then she realized who she was talking to. But I haven't heard a whisper of anything untoward after that. I think she earned his respect. 2 more incidents illustrate the second thing about her, her amazing adaptability to a medium with which she had no experience. Both, again, involve Jerry Finneman. In one case, he kept telling her, "Stay in your key lights." Wait, stop right there. I already hear you say, "Key what?" The key lights on stage or screen are the lights that shine on the actor most of the time. But that requires the actor to stay in the area on which they shine. But Nichelle Nichols didn't know anything about that. Finally, in frustration, Mr. Finneman asked her, "Haven't you been on television before?" And she replied, "No." Wow! She had done so well until then that never before had her inexperience even been an issue. Well, then came the episode that became a comedic legend on the set. Now, one of several. Star Trek had a very happy set. Cast and crew were routinely playing practical jokes on one another. Well, this incident didn't involve a practical joke, but without that history, there is no telling how this episode would have ended. Mr. Finneman was instructing a technician on the adjustment of one of those key lights. Excuse me. It was out of position and keeping her in shadow. So the cinematographer kept shouting to his technician, "No, no, no, you've got her on the black, she's black!" And he kept repeating that double entendre over and over again before he realized how it must sound. When he did, he gulped and said, "Nichelle," and she replied, "But calmly." And that brought the house down. Before I get deeper into some of the episodes, TV shows Nichelle made, and how she almost left the show, and I wonder how many of you guys knew that. I want to shout out to another sponsor, BitNext. This is your replacement for Zoom, Slack, the Google G Suite, Microsoft Office 365, Dropbox, WeTransfer, and Chili Piper, among others. Unlike any of them, BitNext protects your content and conversations so well that even the administrators can't see it. So this is your channel for secure comms, conferencing, cloud storage, and file sharing. Best of all, everything is back-end, so you don't even need client software. If you have a browser, you can use BitNext. Follow the link and give them a try. 28 days free of charge. You can't beat that with a stick. All right. Now, we were talking about the great camaraderie on the Star Trek set and how Nichelle carved out a great place for herself, but something was missing. Nichelle had to struggle to see the writers and story consultant develop her character more than enough just to open hailing frequencies. In fact, once she muttered in frustration, and I quote, "If I have to open a hailing frequency one more time, I'm going to blow up this blankety-blank panel," unquote. Well, all that happened is that someone wrote that line slightly edited into the script for the 5th episode they filmed, which actually was the first episode to air. The title is The Man Trap. That kind of thing might have influenced her decision to take a Broadway gig when someone offered her one. This she did not say anything about to David Gerrold, but she did talk about it, tell NPR in an interview in 2011. She went to Gene Roddenberry to tell him she was quitting, and it rocked him. He begged her to take the weekend to reflect on the kind of world he, Roddenberry, was trying to create. He even said that she was integral to the show. Well, maybe he never made that clear before. You know, if there was one single thing that Roddenberry, his own team, and Desilu and Paramount execs were monumentally careless about, it was assuming that someone lower down understood where they stood when they didn't. That weekend, she attended a fundraiser for the NAACP in Beverly Hills, and there she met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who told her that although she never took part in a civil rights march, she reflected the world that Dr. King wanted to bring about. And then she said she would miss her co-stars. That rocked Dr. King even more than it had Roddenberry. He said, "You can't leave!" Then he explained. Now, as near as I can tease it out from Nichelle's own account, he said something like this: "Don't you understand what this man," meaning Roddenberry, "has achieved? For the first time, we are being seen the world over as we should be seen. Do you understand that this is the only show that my wife Coretta and I will allow our little children to stay up and watch?" Now, I don't think any actor or actress ever had a nicer compliment. Of course she stayed. I found a YouTube video of this interview. I've left a link in the description, and it's going into the end screen. The 2nd and 3rd seasons saw the greatest improvements in how the writers and producers handled the character of Uhura. Now, whether Nichelle set a few ground rules or whether Gene Roddenberry and his staff understood that they had just dodged a phaser blast, we'll likely never know. Remember, she didn't say one word of this to David Gerrold, and that's remarkable in itself. If she had, he almost certainly would have mentioned it. "Say, David, I know you're alive. If you did hear that Martin Luther King story from Nichelle and you want to set the record straight on that, leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you." And that's no exaggeration either. Now, David Gerrold himself deserves much of the credit for the improved character development of Lieutenant Uhura. He, of course, wrote the script for The Trouble with Tribbles, the 15th episode of the 2nd season. He needed a woman to fall for the the Tribbles and buy one to take aboard ship. So at first he wanted to use the character of Yeoman Janice Rand, but the producers had dropped that character. And of the reasons for the drop, the less said the better. In fact, Grace Lee Whitney, who played Janice Rand, took a very dark secret with her to her grave. Anyway, with Janice Rand not available, Gerald switched to Lieutenant Uhura. That turned into one of the best episodes of the original series, and Nichelle Nichols appreciated it very much. She told David Gerald that for the first time she could act fully as a woman, and not as a cardboard cutout. Now, I want to backtrack for a minute because that's not quite correct. In Mirror Mirror, that's the 4th episode of the series, she became one of the 4 normal officers aboard a very dark version of the Enterprise. And earlier, in The Changeling, 3rd episode, an AI literally wiped out all her skills in a clumsy attempt to get her to think strictly about music. Dr. McCoy creates a crash program to re-educate her, so that encounter doesn't do her any permanent injury. Now, 2 of her best episodes occur in the 3rd season. In The Tholian Web, 9th episode of the 3rd season, and the 2nd of the 2 favorite episodes of all time for her, Nichelle Nichols plays Uhura out of uniform, dressing modestly for sleep. And suddenly she sees her captain floating, ghost-like, in front of her dressing table. She winds up confined to sickbay until other officers report seeing the same vision. And those visions give Spock the vital clue he needs to rescue Captain Kirk from an interspatial sink. If you want to understand that better, watch the episode. It should still be available on Amazon Prime and Hulu and maybe on Paramount Plus. Next comes Plato's Stepchildren, the 10th episode. Nichelle made headlines in that episode, sharing the first interracial kiss with William Shatner, who played Captain Kirk. Kirk and Uhura object not to kissing one another, but to their planetary captors telekinetically forcing them to do it. Now, apparently, the studio executives summoned Nichelle to a conference about the kiss, and she told them, with all the self-assertion they perhaps should have remembered, that she intended to do the scene straight up and not hold back. The scene worked. I have a link in the description to a clip of that scene, and also to her interview in which she described the kiss and the filming of it. For you YouTubers, both those videos are going into the end screen. Now, it's worth remembering that Martin Luther King had fallen to James Earl Ray's bullet in April of 1968. That was the year that the 3rd season began. Riots, of course, broke out in many cities east of the Mississippi on the strength of it. But Star Trek continued, and Nichelle Nichols stayed with it. And that brings us to to one episode in which she played an interesting part, however minor. That episode is Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, 15th episode of the 3rd season. Frank Gorshin and Lou Antonio appear as 2 warring strangers, each black on one side and white on the other, but on opposite sides. The 2 spout off the typical 1960s slogans at one another. Racism from Frank Gorshin, militancy from Lou Antonio. And watching these 2, Lieutenants Uhura and Sulu and Ensign Chekhov, shake their heads as if to say, can you believe these guys? What is their problem? And at one point they observed that Earth knew persecution and they read about it in history books. And in the end, Enterprise returns to their homeworld and finds it deserted. Its cities burned out and still decaying bodies registering on the sensors. All of the people are dead! The 2 have one final clash on the bridge, and then Lou Antonio flees to the surface with Frank Gorshin hot on his heels. And Uhura says, but it doesn't make any sense! Well, with that line, Nichelle Nichols shared the ideal for which Martin Luther King encouraged her to strive. Namely, that a day would come when a multiracial crew would watch two men play out a drama from what to them was ancient history, and that drama would only mystify them. Nichelle Nichols sadly did not appear in all episodes. She probably could have made a stronger mark in many of the episodes she missed. So we'll never know what insight she might have brought to these storylines. The Way to Eden, the 20th episode. A gang of galactic dropouts turns the lives of the Enterprise wardroom upside down. Then two of them die after reaching a world in forbidden territory. Turnabout Intruder, 24th and last episode. A woman from Kirk's past, resentful of his jilting of her and of the old boy network maintaining a glass ceiling, plots to supplant Kirk in his command and even in his body. In each of these episodes, a relief communicator sits in Uhura's chair. Each episode, I think, would have been much better with Uhura's insight. But Nichelle Nichols still leaves a legacy we can only admire. It reaches far beyond Star Trek and pervades the television industry. I don't think very many people can dispute that she left American television a better place than she found it. And along the way, she helped improve American society as well. Link in the description to the article, to the White House obituary on Nichelle Nichols, to the Kate Mulgrew and NASA tweets, to those two interviews and that TV scene clip I mentioned, and the conservative news and views. I have another link to the awesome online store and the BitNext, as I also mentioned. And if you like what you've heard, you can like this video. On the end screen, I'm going to leave a subscribe link and also links to both of those YouTube interviews and the clip showing the kiss. This is Terry A. Hurlbut delivering another declaration of truth and reminding you to let the truth set you free.